very difficult topic is civil rights and the evolution of civil rights in this entire region. The South, after it was defeated, the number one income source for the state prior to the Civil War was the taxation on the ownership of slaves. It was $3 million a year, which was the largest income the state received, single income the state received. Very important. So after you abolished slavery, there was no income. Very little, and the South was impoverished. And instead of being able to develop equal rights through a federal system, that gave way to political machinations where you had evolved to sharecropping. So what you did then is you allowed blacks and poor whites to have shacks and a piece of ground where then the owner of the land would, it's the exact opposite of single tax, would then take a percentage of the crop that was done. And you were never able to get ahead. And that's just the way the landowners wanted it to be. So you had a huge segregation and class distinction in those days. And of course, if blacks got out of line, they were treated as subhumans. And when they would gather together or do anything to try to move forward, there would be lynchings and killings and others. And that's when the Klan was very open and excessive in this, well, it was all over the South. And of course, that comes up into the 20th century. Then up into the 20s, you had tens of thousands of Klansmen descending on Washington for gigantic marches. And you even had a candidate, presidential candidate, that got pretty close at that point in time. But the South was going to hold firm on its segregation. And so that works us up into the 60s with Wallace. I recently did a painting of the 4 little girls that were killed in the bombing in 1963 in the 16th Street Baptist Church. And I had the honor of being able to go into the basement to the exact spot where this happened and work with Carolyn Mall McKinstry, who wrote the book While the World Watched. She was the last one to pass through to say hi to her friends before she went upstairs and the bomb went off. So I replicated the entire scene. Carolyn came in, I worked with several of the families of the girls, and produced a painting I'm very proud of, called Carolyn's Memory. So with that, but also back in the 80s and 90s, I worked for NBC for 6 years covering federal court as an artist. And one of the trials I covered was the Michael Donald civil trial. Now, Michael Donald was the last African American lynched in the United States. I hope to God he's the last one. And of course, the civil trial was suing the Klan, the Michael Donald family, and the Southern Poverty Law Center handled the case. It was the making of the Southern Poverty Law Center for the Morris Dees, was in the civil trial saying that the Klan was responsible because they encouraged their members to do a lot of these heinous acts. And so the trial was one Klansman after another, including Robert Shelton, who was then the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan. And of course, he sat on the stand and he talked about, we're Boy Scouts, we don't tell people to do all these mayhem things. And of course they did. The most poignant part of the entire trial was I was sitting as close to Mrs. Donald, the mother of Michael Donald, who was a fine young man, as close as I am to you. And she sat there in honor of her son. And she sat every day with her head held high and her sitting proudly for her son. And at times I'd look at her and tears would be just streaming down her face, but she never broke. She didn't sob, she didn't make a scene. She was there to represent the honor of her son. Tiger Knowles, who was one of the people that beat her son to death and then hung him from a tree, testified day after day after day just talking about all the things that he did, just as cold as he could be. But on his last day of testimony, and there was no way to tell he was even cognizant that Mrs. Donald was in the room. But on his last day of testimony, he stopped in mid-testimony and he looked at her and he said, "Ma'am, I only hope that you can forgive me for what I've done." And without a second's hesitation, she said, "Young man, I already have." And there was not a dry eye in the courtroom, including mine. Very, very powerful. If there's a higher symbol of Christian forgiveness than that, I don't think it exists. So that was the creation. At that trial, the Ku Klux Klan was made. In fact, Mrs. Donald ended up owning the Ku Klux Klan assets and headquarters in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Hate groups at that point in time legally were made responsible for the actions of their members, which is a huge lawsuit threshold that was crossed at that time. That really began the change, and what Southern Poverty Law Center has been able to do is track Nazis and neo-Nazis and skinheads and all of those organizations so they can monitor what they're saying and telling their people they can or can't do. And it's a very, very positive tool in trying to end people who are trying to gather to be able to do terrible things to each other. But right now, with what you're seeing with Black Lives Matter and all of these terrible things that are going on now, it's a faction of America that would love to return us to those times. And we have to fight them because we're better than that, and we need to be better than that. And we need to move forward. As Dr. Seuss said, people are people no matter how small, and we've got to hold on to the fact that we're all equal under the law and by rights with each other.